UFC, Bellator, PFL, we got it all this week in MMA action, and I'm here to break it all down, or at least some of it. I mean, obviously, you know the drill by now with Bellator and PFL. I'm not going to go through every fight. I'm not going to go super deep on it, but I'm going to try and give the highlights, the fights I'm looking forward to, what I think is going to happen, and do my best because, I mean, there's only so many hours in the day to break things down, and I want to focus on the UFC fights because as a card, the UFC always has the depth. So let's get on to it. Let's talk about PFL real quick. First up, we got a card tomorrow. As I record this, is it in the afternoon or is it evening-ish here on the East Coast? Obviously, Anthony Pettis is in action against Stevie Ray. That's going to be an interesting fight. The big question there really is, what's Pettis got still left in the tank? Since leaving the UFC, he's not been great. The loss to Clay Collard, the loss to Roush Mafio, not great looks. Some of the old is still there. And then the win over Miles Price doesn't really mean a ton, unfortunately. So we'll see. We'll see. I am going to take Pettis. I think that in the post-UFC, he's starting to adapt and kind of be a little bit more himself. And, I mean, the dynamicism he has is just something that Ray doesn't match. Like, Stevie Ray is also a kind of long-in-the-tooth fighter who's kind of your basic nuts and bolts fighter. He's not going to do anything terribly surprising, but he is going to do everything fairly well. And that should still feel like something that Pettis can win. But we'll see. Henan Feria versus Kitse Abreu. That's a good fight, actually. I don't want to say I really like that fight because that implies that we're kind of giving credit to a tournament format to a degree on matchmaking, and that's not really how it should go. I do have Abreu losing this fight. I think that Abreu at heavyweight, which is where this fight is going to be, just too small. Not that 6'2" is like super, super small or anything, but you are dealing with an opponent who is 6'8", very physical, very powerful. Abreu is a guy who doesn't have a ton of dynamicism. And to be honest, at 205, like his whole deal was physicality. So I don't think really the move to heavyweight is a great idea. So I've got Ferreira in that one. I've got Kyle Bochniak to beat Chris Wade. I don't have a super amount of faith in either guy. Like they're both like interesting challenges for up and comers and young fighters because they will find the little weaknesses that exist inside their games and exploit them. But against each other, I don't know. It's just not super amazing. I'll go with Wade, actually. I thought Bochniak initially, but we'll go with Wade. Bruno Capoloza versus Matthias Scheifel. Going with Capoloza in that one. I'm taking Ante Deleja versus Shelton Graves. Bubba Jenkins against Ronaldo Exon. Bubba Jenkins has had a career that is like kind of disappointing, but I mean, still a lot of physicality there. Dennis Goldsoff against UFC veteran Maurice Greene. I'm taking Goldsoff. Lance Palmer against Shaman Marias. That one's kind of more interesting. Like, the problem with Palmer has always been that there is virtually no threat of actually finishing a fight from him. And that's why he lost to Chris Wade. That's why he lost to Bubba Jenkins. But at the same time, Moraes does feel like kind of a guy that his game should function against. But he has lost 3 in a row. So, I don't know. It's a tough one. But I'm going to take Palmer. I just think when it comes down to it, Moraes is a very good fighter. He's got a lot of physical upside. Tremendously talented striker. Powerful guy. Capable grappler, but not an amazing grappler. It does just feel like, at the end of the day, Palmer should get what he wants from the fight, even though the book on how to beat Lance Palmer is pretty obvious. But this does feel like a matchup that still favors him. Juan Adams versus Sam Key. Gonna go Juan Adams, even though his career has been really unimpressive. Alejandro Flores versus Kyoji Kudo. Flores and Brandon Logain to beat Ago Huskick. That's the PFL card. The big name, of course, there is, of course, the Pettis. Although I think actually there are more interesting fights elsewhere on the card, because as much as Pettis' fight might be actually quite good against Ray, could be interesting because I think Pettis can make almost anything interesting. There is also a possibility that it's just like a sad watch, kind of like the PFL run has been for Pettis the whole time. That realistically, he goes out there and just looks like a shell of his former self. So, I don't know. If that brings eyeballs to the product, cool. But it is a little bit mixed watching it. And then on the Bellator card, not going to go through the whole thing because there's a lot of filler on any Bellator card, unfortunately. Gegard Mousasi versus Johnny Eblin. I commented on this before. Eblin's undefeated, but it's not against anyone super great. Like, his best win is a decision win over John Salter. I need more than that before I really pick someone to beat Gegard Mousasi. I need a ton more than that, I think, unfortunately. We just saw Gegard versus Austin Vanderford and handled that business quite easily, quite well. So, no, I'm not going to take Eblin. I'm going to take Damien Sabatello to beat Leandro Higo. Higo's a good fighter, tests you kind of everywhere. There's a lot of heat on this fight for some reason. Specifically from Sabatello's side. He seems to really, really dislike Leandro Higo. I'm not honestly sure why. Honestly. They haven't fought. I don't know what the deal is. Don't get me wrong. Sabatello is kind of boring. He's kind of just a wrestler, just a top control guy. But that honestly kind of feels like how you beat Higo. It feels like he has the physicality to implement his game, and he has the top grappling to avoid anything that Higo might do from bottom or force and scrambles. But I will be cheering for Higo in this because I don't know. There's like an air of general douchebaggery about Sabatello that I don't honestly enjoy. And then on top of that, obviously, he's a guy who just isn't particularly exciting. Like if he goes on in this Bellator Grand Prix, like who do you want to see him face? Whereas with Higo, there's some things I would like to see. I mean, I don't think Higo has any upside in terms of winning the tournament, but he's a fun action fighter. Magomedov versus Enrique Barzola. I'm thinking Barzola. And that might be crazy because, I mean, I don't know. Like, there's nothing super impressive about Barzola in terms of physicality. Like, there's no super strength, super speed, super explosiveness, anything like that. There's no flash. But my lord, are the meat and potatoes exquisite. He forces a pace. He'll attack on multiple different levels. And I've just never really been a big believer in Magomedov. So, yeah, we're going to go with, I'm going to go with, I should say, Enrique Barzola. And then the rest of the card, I mean, you got Brendan Ward on there, but it's kind of a just setup fight. You got Dan Moret on there, but it's kind of just a setup fight. You've got Brett Primus on there, but it's kind of just a setup fight. You got Kat Zingano versus Pat Sormason, going with Zingano. You got Talkoff with kind of an easy fight. You got Homasi with kind of an easy fight. And that's kind of the card. And then you Alejandra Lara is on the card. Always, I actually really do enjoy watching her fight. And no, it's not just the physical attractive factor that she does bring to the table. I'm always interested in what she's trying to put together in terms of a style. Like, I don't think it's actually going to work long term. I don't think there's any like tremendous upside. But she does interesting things with her style that blends different things together than you normally see. So, like, if you don't know what I'm talking about, check out the fight. Really, check out the fight. I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. And then Aaron Jeffrey and Michael or Mandel Nalio are my Canadians on the card. I'm going to be cheering for Jeffrey, but Fabio Aguilar probably is a bridge too far. I'm going to be cheering for Mandel, but Bryce Logan probably is a slightly bridge too far. And of course, Talkoff will probably show off and do something cool in his fight. So there's a lot worth watching, even if, like, in terms of, like, truly compelling matchups, it's really just Barzola and Magomedov, and then like that's about it, really. Like that's the only super interesting fight for fight's sake, matchup sake, interesting, revealing fight. But there's some good action on the card and some interesting fighters that do things that you maybe don't normally see. Like Tokov's a good example of that, as is Lara. So there you go. Let's get into the UFC card. I'm mixed on this card, like exceptionally mixed on this card. It feels like a flat main event. And I say that as someone who really likes Gamrot and Tsarukyan. It just doesn't feel like a main event. Maybe it's because we just had a big pay-per-view and we just had a big fight night card with Josh Emmett and Calvin Kattar that had legitimate title implications. And then we get this. And this is not that, I guess is what I'm getting at. But we do have Shavkat Rakhmonov on the card. We do have a fight that I'm bizarrely interested in, Thiago Moises versus Christos. We've got Umar Nurmagomedov, who's a super prospect on the card. We've got a fight that I'm looking forward to and I think is way too far down this list. Holly and Piva versus Sergey Morizov. I think that's fun. And also I think Mario Bautista versus Brian Kelleher is going to be a lot of fun. So like there's some good stuff here. It just feels like there's no main course, I guess. It feels like appetizer after appetizer after appetizer. And it could still turn out to be really, really good. I'm not someone who's ever going to back up the idea that like people are like, the worst UFC cards on paper are actually the best. Because it's bullshit. Then that's like a instant get out of jail free card for a matchmaker not doing a good job. And like in some cases, I don't think they've done a good job. I don't like Josh Parisian versus Alan Baudot. I guess you could argue that I don't really like having either of them on a card, so that's fine. But I'm actually not even really a big fan of the Neil Magny versus Shavkat Rakhmonov fight, really, realistically. Like, I'm interested in what Rakhmonov is going to do, obviously. Super prospect, super interesting guy. But at the same time, like, I feel like Neil Magny's actually a bad matchup. But we'll go deeper into that at the same time. And then I do also think that, like, Cliff Curtis or Chris Curtis versus... Why do I want to keep calling him Cliff Curtis? Who is Cliff Curtis? Should look that up. I feel like Chris Curtis versus Rodolfo Vieira is also kind of like a little bit of a waste of like both of those fighters. Like I think that there is way more interesting things that they could be doing. So, you know, there you go. All right, let's get into the card. Arman Tsarukyan versus Mateusz Gamrot. Tsarukyan coming in at a minus 260. So I thought I was going to have a hot take by taking Tsarukyan in this fight. Apparently that's not going to be the case. Both these guys lost in their UFC debuts. In the case of Tsarukyan, he was expected to because, number one, he came in with kind of minimal fanfare and also got matched up with Islam Makhachev and then lost. And in the case of Gamrot, it was a more unexpected loss, but it's a loss that's aged very, very well against Guram Kutateladze. What it comes down to is I think that Gamrot he's very good at what he does. Obviously, European ADCC. I forget if he's a champion or if he just is like a finalist. I want to say champion. Of course, was a KSW champion for a long time. One of their more notable fighters, actually, to be exported to the UFC. He's done well since that loss to Kutateladze with wins over more name than actual value, Jeremy Stevens, but also that win over Diego Ferreira. Really, really cool. And probably the biggest port to this fight, actually, is that fight right there. And he also beat Scott Holtzman. But I think that... So here's the thing, is that Ferreira has a lot of limitations as a fighter. In the sense that, mostly mentally, he's tremendously aggressive and tends to sort of self-destruct on himself. Like, for example, against Gamrot, he did injure his rib, for example. Like, that would be a great example of exactly what I'm talking about, where, like, you're like, oh, you're actually a pretty good striker, a really, really good grappler. You actually have pretty good physicality. You have good wrestling. You're not like a standard BJJ guy. You can do a lot of different things, but it all kinds of comes with this like flash paper wrapped around it that will at some point explode or burn up and will take you with it. That's kind of the Ferreira style. Tsarukyan doesn't have that. Tsarukyan has a well put together style that is based on wrestling and grappling and top control, all things that are hard to implement on Gamrot. but also had pretty good striking. He's got decent counter timing. He's got good accuracy. My leg really hurts for some reason. I don't know why. Like, really actually hurts. This is interesting and problematic when I'm recording. So, excuse me, you're going to hear a little bit of like massaging in the background as I try to figure out what the deal is here. It's actually hurting me to break down this fight. Look at that. But yeah, I just think Tsarukyan has more tools to win in a nutshell. Like, Tsarukyan is a top control grappler A game. But he has a B. He has like a really pretty deep B game, actually. He looks confident on the feet. That fight with Joel Alvarez, I think that won a lot of people over because I was expecting to come into this and seeing Gamrot as the favorite, and he's not. So there you go. Yeah, I'm going with Tsarukyan. Again, Gamrot, really good striker, or not really good striker, really good grappler, pretty good top game, but not necessarily that much physicality. I think that was highlighted actually by the Guram Kutateladze fight. That like Kutateladze's physicality was just at times way too much for him. And I think Tsarukyan has a very, very different A game, but can bring that very similar physicality in the clinch and control the stand-up range. So yeah, I'm a big fan of what Tsarukyan's putting together here. So yeah, I got to take him. I'm not sure if he finishes Gamrot at any point. Like, I trust Gamrot's cardio fairly well. Gamrot's never been finished, so that tends to lead me to go with a decision in terms of method. But a finish either way wouldn't actually be all that surprising. Tsarukyan's got some good power in his hands. He's got some good submissions in his own right. Gamrot is obviously a very good submission fighter, so if it finishes, not going to be surprised. But I do see it probably going the distance. Neil Magny versus Shavkat Rakhmonov. Rakhmonov a minus 400 favorite. That's too wide. All right, so here's the thing. I really like what Rakhmonov could be. He's got a lot of physicality. He seems to actually have a innately good timing for counters. He is a guy who has a pretty good submission game, good front headlock, good back take game, very, very strong. Very strong. I have to emphasize that. With a good clinch game. But here's the thing. And I think this probably I can honestly just replay my Neil Magny versus Max Griffin prediction and basically say the same thing of Rakhmonov has the physicality, the talent, and the technique to absolutely beat Magny. And honestly, probably actually run him over. The problem is that a lot of his game leads to going into the clinch. And you don't want to clinch with Neil Magny. Not because he's some freak of nature when it comes to physicality or his clinch game or whatever, but because it's an incredibly nuanced clinch game that really no one has solved. And that's kind of the thing, is that to have it at a minus 400 favorite, you have to believe that Rakhmonov is going to be the first person to just absolutely solve that and destroy Magny in the clinch, because I guarantee you it's going to go there. I guarantee you he's not going to come up with a game plan that avoids the clinch. He's not going to fight against type, I don't think. Like, it's going to look like a Rakhmonov fight from a game plan, from a technical standpoint. But it's going to be a fight where he actually meets someone in the clinch who can probably do some things, who could probably neutralize him. How does he solve that problem? I'm still picking Rakhmonov because I just think that the physical aspects are too much of a problem. I think like the difference between this and like the Max Griffin fight is that I thought Griffin was by far not something new to the clinch for Magny. And a guy who was going to get a little bit flustered at range in a way that Rakhmonov probably won't. That being said, Rakhmonov is still facing a 2-inch height disadvantage and a 3-inch reach disadvantage, so that could play heavily on it. But yeah, I do have to back the prospect here to pass the Magny test. But like a lot of people are really excited. Like people are excited about this fight. I don't really know why. Because this, I mean, he could just blitz through him. Like it could be that good. It could be what the hardest of hardcore Chimaev fans wanted to have happen with Gilbert Burns. Like that's on the table. But it could also be a really, really draining clinch fight. Speaking of draining, speaking of terrible, third fight from the top, Josh Parisian versus Alan Baudot. Why? Why is this fight happening? I don't want it. Oh Lord, I don't like either of their paths to victory. I don't. Parisian likes to range strike and likes to pocket box and isn't necessarily good at it. Baudot is kind of good at that type of fight, but breaks down under pressure. So if Parisian just applies the Parker Porter game, he can probably win this fight. But this is really painful. I don't like it. I don't want it in my life. I'm going with Parisian. It's a near even betting line at least, so at least nobody thinks either of these guys is a surefire bet. I guess that's a good sign. But oh god, yeah, no, and especially as the third. This is late in the card. Oh, I don't want it. I don't want it. Thiago Moises versus Christos Giagos, minus 240 favorite for Moises, plus 200 for Giagos. Seems a bit wide to me. I am picking Moises. I think there is actually a pretty good, nuanced, range-keeping, counter-striking game that Moises does employ. It's not super creative, but it does vary up targets. Works the leg kick. Works a good jab. Works some good combinations. Kind of does everything fairly well. Okay athleticism, okay physicality, not amazing. And Giagos has good physicality and not necessarily the technique to really back it up. The real question here is that we haven't really seen Moises against somebody who wants to bully him and has physicality and isn't just like really, really way better than him. Like Giagos more closely resembles Islam Makhachev than and Ismagulov, I guess, than anything else that we've seen Moises fight in the UFC. I guess the hope, I suppose, would be that like we did see Moises beat Alexander Hernandez, and Hernandez is similar in physicality, similar in A game to what Giagos does. But I think Giagos is way more aware that he's just a bully. Whereas Hernandez, in a lot of his fights, gets caught up trying to be nuanced, technical, capital T technical. And it lets the fight slip away from him. Giagos doesn't do that. Giagos is simple, but he knows he's simple in terms of being a fighter. He knows that there's not a ton of depth to his game or a ton of nuance or a ton of deception. He's going to go out there. He's going to try and bully you. And I'm just basically counting, I suppose is the word, that Moises will work good footwork, keep it at range, and weave in some good counters and sting him enough to take the decision. I guess that's what I'm going with. It's an interesting fight. Don't get me wrong. For where they are, I mean, this is perfectly fine matchmaking. Umar Nurmagomedov versus Nate Maness. I am taking Nurmagomedov. Now, I'm not buying into the hype of the Nurmagomedov name. And this is not an anti-Habib statement or an anti-his family statement or even an anti-Dagestani statement or any of that kind. We've seen enough in MMA that the last name sometimes just leads to a lot of hype. I mean, sure, there are good brother combinations, but there's a Micah Miller for a Cole Miller. There's a Dan Lozon for a Joe Lozon. There's a Jason Guida for a Clay Guida. And I think Umar is Habib's cousin, as opposed to being brothers or anything like that. They refer to each other as brother, but that's, I think, a term of comradeship and gymship that doesn't actually reflect their actual biological connection. But at the same time, Manus is a guy who is kind of a little bit of a mess technically. Hasn't really bit him that badly, of course. He's, only lost one fight, that being to Taylor Lapillus, pardon me, in a manner that probably won't be replicated here because Nurmagomedov is not the style of striker that Lapillus is. But Umar's got a good, well put together game. It's well schooled. It's got decent stand up, excellent submission hunter. And I see Manus as having way too many opportunities for a guy who is pretty lethal in a lot of different ways. And probably at some point Nurmagomedov will get that neck and we'll get the submission. That's where I'm going with it, and we'll find out, I guess. Might be in for a rude awakening. We'll see. Minus 800 favorite is Nurmagomedov. That is too wide. That is way too wide. Plus 550 for Manus. Wow. Way too wide. Chris Curtis versus Ronaldo Vieira. I like both of these guys. I don't really like this as a matchup because I want to see Curtis do fun things striking, and I want to see Vieira do fun things grappling. And, both things will probably happen over the course of this fight. One of them is going to probably end up imparting somewhat of their will on the other at some point. Probably Vieira early, because he comes out hard. And I'm picking Vieira to submit Curtis because I think he's just that good of a grappler, and I don't really think there's enough physicality there from Curtis to resist him. I am seeing that Vieira is the underdog. I'm a little bit surprised by that. Plus 130. I know Curtis is on a good run lately. Like a really good run lately. Beating Brendan Allen, very good. Beating Phil Haas, very good. Those are two guys who, have a wrestling top control game that kind of resembles Vieira, but Vieira's is, I think, way more dangerous. Also, I think it's just that Brendan Allen with that fight against Jacob Malkoun, I think really showed some that there's a lacklusterness to his imposition of will. You can even look back at like the Kyle Daukaus fight for like a similar thing. But I don't know. I'm just not. I'm not feeling it. Like Curtis was losing both of his fights before winning, and if Vieira gasses out like he did against Anthony Hernandez, he's gonna be in trouble because he's gonna get knocked out. But he looked better last time out. Looks like he's sorted out some of his nerves because it was never. I don't think it was ever a cardio thing. Like when he gassed out against Hernandez, I don't think it was a cardio thing because this is a guy who's been doing jiu-jitsu for a long, long time. Obviously, you could gas him out by striking with him or something, but like he gassed himself out grappling. I think it was just pure nervous energy to a certain degree that I hope he's learned to deal with and make forward. But like this is my first underdog pick of the card. Plus 130 for Vieira, minus 155 for Curtis. I'm actually surprised that Curtis is that favorite again, but at the same time, that doesn't necessarily feel like bad. Please tell me Carlos Ulberg's a favorite. Oh, he is. Minus 125 to plus 100. I'm going with Tefan and Chukwe to beat Carlos Ulberg. All right, here's the deal. I think Ulberg is pretty terrible by UFC standards. Don't get me wrong. He's tall. He's technical. He's got actually pretty decent instincts for combination punching a little bit. But like his win over Fabio Cherant was all about Fabio Cherant being like, wait, this guy's hitting me where I can't hit him. I'm scared. I'm falling back. I'm limited. I'm completely locked out of the fight. And that's how Ahlberg won. And Chukwe is going to move forward. That's his thing. He loves to pressure strike. He loves to put the clinch on. I just don't think Ahlberg has the mental fortitude, the physical durability, really, the coolness under pressure. No. I think he got here way too early. He came into Contender Series with a 2-0 record against nobodies. I just don't think he's remotely ready. I think, is there a good fighter in there long term? Take your time, develop him properly? Sure. He's 6'4" with a 77-inch reach. Trains at a city kickboxing. I'm sure they're going to have some new tricks for him here. But as much as he's at a way better camp, because let's face it, Nchukwe's at Team Lloyd Irvin, which has all kinds of problems on a moral and legal level. It also has a problem on a technical level in the sense that Lloyd Irvin fighters tend to he takes really good physical specimens, which Nchukwe is one, puts on some basic but effective technique, and it just never really seems to get any better. Sadiq Yusuf's another good example of this. He's another Lloyd Irvin guy where it's came in, I'm like, oh, a lot of physicality here, a lot of interesting power game, both as a striker and as a grappler. I'm very intrigued. And then it's been the same fighter ever since, and there's not really any improvement. For Nchukwe, the good news here is that he doesn't need to be new. He kind of fought this fight against Mike Rodriguez. Not that Rodriguez and Ahlberg are the same, but the same kind of reasonably creative volume, combination puncher at range, mixes in kicks. But the difference here is Rodriguez isn't allergic to pressure and is actually pretty good in the clinch and still got beat up in the clinch. Whereas Ahlberg, I think, is allergic to pressure. I think he is allergic to the clinch. And this is the fight I'm going to put some decent money on. I mean, plus 100 is not a huge underdog or anything, but I don't know what the bettors are seeing. TJ Brown versus, I'm going to try and say it. Nurmagomedov is the last name. Shailen, I think. I'm going with TJ Brown. Nurmagomedov, I like the building blocks of his game, but there's a problem that when you're 36 fights into your pro career, granted only 28 years old, so maybe there's some development to be done, that there is still a complete lack of a connecting part from your striking to your grappling. His takedowns are incredibly predictable. If you want to watch the Sean Soriano fight's a good example of that. A fight that he did win, mind you, but one in which Soriano, who's kind of a notably not UFC caliber fighter, was able to largely nullify his wrestling game. The problem for Soriano is that whenever Nurmagomedov got on top of him, he stayed there. His top game is very good, but it's not very punishing. There's not a lot of ground and pound to it. There's not a lot of submissions to it. And on the feet, he's got a good power striking game. There's a lot of obvious physicality there, a lot of obvious power, a lot of obvious strength, but there's not necessarily a ton of speed. And there's not a ton of variability to it. There's a good leg kick. There's a good 1-2. There's some decent range keeping tools. But all things considered, nothing really flows. It's all divorced. It's all very he's Chinese, but it's a very Japanese game where they're if you're just kind of setting up a UFC undisputed fighter or whatever the game is called, and you're giving him skills, the numbers of how good are his punches, how good are his kicks, how good are his takedowns, how good is his grappling, how all that, it's all high, but anything of like the mixing of them is like just low, like very, very poor. And while I don't think a ton of TJ Brown, realistically, I think he's okay physically. I think he's got a well-rounded but not particularly imposing game. He's a scrambler, volume puncher, pace guy, essentially. That I don't think is going to be in the UFC for all that long, but I think that, like, as much as he has a lower ceiling than Nurmagomedov, what he's got is a well put together game. Things do flow. He flows from grappling to striking to a reasonable degree. He changes range fairly well. And yes, he absolutely did get his legs cracked by Danny Chavez. But I don't think Nurmagomedov has the same kind of low kick game. Like, it's a good low kick game, but I don't think it's that good. And also, I mean, Chavez is also like kind of a beast. So yeah, I'm gonna go with TJ Brown to win a decision here. Raulian Piva versus Sergey Morizov. I'm surprised Morizov is the favorite here. Morizov's UFC run has been, granted, a little bit unfortunate. He got Umar Nurmagomedov in his debut. His most recent fight was against Douglas Silva de Andrade, who's a beast. And a win over Khalid Taha in the meantime. But like, maybe it's just that like I don't really think all that much of Khalid Taha that really comes to mind. I think that like the problem is that Morizov is not necessarily a great athlete, but kind of fights like he is. Like he's developed a game that involves him imposing his will on the opponent and having physical advantages that just aren't going to be present in the UFC. And that's why I'm going to pick Raulian Piva. Piva's game is very well dedicated to his skill set. I mean, this is a guy who did go out there and beat Kyler Phillips, and that's why I'm very surprised by this. Like, sure, he did just lose to Sean O'Malley, but like, what part of O'Malley's game does Morizov have? Like, what part of O'Malley's, and I'm going to be complimentary of Sean O'Malley here for a second, what part of O'Malley's actually very good range boxing game does Morizov have? What parts of his frame does he have? Like Piva, just from like reach and height, is going to probably get the better of the range striking. He's got a 2.5 inch reach advantage. He's 2 inches taller. Yes, he's coming up from 125 still, and I'm still not entirely sure that his physicality is going to translate to 135. But I think it will against Morizov. Like Morizov is a kind of small bantamweight and not particularly physical one. I don't know. I'm very puzzled by this. Piva's a good wrestler. Piva's a good grappler. Piva's a good striker. I don't get it. I really don't get it. Yeah, we'll leave it at that. Cody Durden versus JP Buys. JP Buys is the underdog here. Or no, he's the favorite. Minus 120, minus 105. So it's even betting money odds. So we can't really talk about this fight without talking about the whole drama surrounding JP Buys. So JP Buys and his wife, Cheyenne Buys, got signed by the UFC. They're not together anymore. Hence why Cheyenne Buys is now Cheyenne Velismus. And Buys' run in the UFC hasn't been particularly great. He's not super physical. He went up to bantamweight for a bit. That was a mistake. Please tell me this is at flyweight. Please tell me this is at flyweight. It is. He's small. He's a good technical wrestler, but like there's not really a lot of physicality backing it up. He's a good volume pace striker, but there's not a lot of physicality backing it up. He's got a decent submission game, decent grappling game. Ken actually does scramble very well. And Durden's kind of the exact same, except that like his striking's a little bit more power-based than it is volume-based, and it's not necessarily the same pace. But with Buys, you have the whole one, your wife has left you for a gym mate, Roman Dolidze. Your wife has come out and said that the marriage was essentially fake. It was a green card marriage. Which, by the way, I liked it that like a couple of like lawyers started commenting that like Cheyenne needs to actually shut up about that, because It's not like that makes her look any better in like public eye. And it's not like it's going to help her legally. But anyways, nothing's come of it. As far as I know, there's no legal trouble on the matter. But I imagine that that's weighing on Baez' mind. And then, of course, with Durden, you have like him being a scumsucker, sort of, if not racist, then xenophobic person. And I suppose there is a way to draw a line where those are not necessarily the same thing. But they're very, very close and very related. I don't know. I don't like Durden. I want Baez to win because unlike it seems like almost every other MMA relationship that ends up in a breakup, like, I mean, think about the MMA relationship breakups here for a second. How often has the public really sided with the man? And this is not like me being like poor men. No, this has been my reaction to it as well. Like when Tate and Caraway broke up. Oh God, finally, like Caraway was terrible. Brendan Schaub and Ronda Rousey. And then even like ongoing relationships, like the serious groomer vibes you get off of Pat Barry with Thug Rose, and the generally unhealthiness that seems to be Travis Browne and Ronda Rousey. But I mean, whatever. Valentina Shevchenko, the various coach datings, like it's kind of rare where like the guy turns into the face on the breakup. So I'll be cheering for Baez, but with everything that's going on in his life, I can't imagine that we're going to get like the best performance of his career. And if you do not possess a physical advantage against Cody Durden, I do wonder how you're going to win. Because I'm assuming that Baez' idea here is to come out and try to out-wrestle Cody Durden. And Durden's pretty good at that. He's not super athletic, but he is pretty good at that. I don't really know if there's any like Durden loss that kind of like would correspond to this. Like Arichi Lang kind of tried to do that and didn't work. Maybe the Jared Scoggins fight way back in 2017. Maybe that's kind of a thing about it. Although that being said, Scoggins actually is really physically imposing. He's just an idiot. I can't pick Baez. Will cheer for him because Durden seems like kind of a scumbag. And I'm kind of like hoping for like some good things for Baez. Now watch as it comes out that he was a terrible, terrible husband. Mario Bautista versus Brian Kelleher. Bautista's a minus 160 favorite. I'm a little bit surprised by that. Just because Kelleher seems to like have a bigger name. But I actually do kind of agree with it. Kelleher is the sort of guy who is incredibly live by the sword, die by the sword. He's very much a aggressive fighter, wants to pressure, wants to hit very hard, but leaves himself very, very open. Like if you look at his fights, he's a guy who is entirely capable of beating, for example, Yuri Alcantara really convincingly, but is also entirely capable of like getting subbed by Montel Jackson and like just getting outworked by Cody Stimon and Ricky Simone, and having like a bizarrely competitive fight with Kevin Kroom. Like it's a weird career, and like Domingo Plarte is another example of this. But a guy who also beat Hunter Azure and Ode Osborne. Like it's just weird, and like I'm never gonna really fully understand like how the dynamics work for him. But like here's what it comes down to. Bautista is pretty non-adverse to pressure. He does have some countering skills. He has some power. He has some creativity. If you give him gaps, he'll use it. And that's it's what it comes down to. I think he'll hurt him at some point and probably finish him. And this is a fight I'm really looking forward to. This is great matchmaking. It's a chance to kind of propel Bautista a little bit higher up. He's at a good gym. He's got good physicality. He's got a well put together game. He's exciting. There's all the reasons to really kind of want to push this guy. How old is he? That's the one thing I'm pondering. 28 years old. So yeah, like, still reasonably young. And yeah, Kelleher definitely can lose the exact way that Mario Bautista tends to like to win. Although the fact that he didn't finish Jay Perrin is kind of disturbing. But like, it's kind of similar to like the Miles Johns fight to a certain degree. And sure, there's a lot to be worried about by the fact that Trevin Jones knocked out Mario Bautista. Kelleher hits a lot harder than that. Kelleher probably actually has a better put together game than Trevin Jones. But Jones is also like a professional spoiler in that regard. So I am going to go with Bautista to probably win the fight at range, force Kelleher to be aggressive, force Kelleher to come in, and the fact that you have a 5-inch reach advantage obviously helps with everything I'm saying. But he'll get the job done, and yeah, I think he will. One of the easier fights to pick on the card, I think, is Jinyu Fry versus Vanessa Demopoulos. Vanessa Demopoulos had a nice submission last time out. There's obviously something to her. She's got a good guard game, but like the thing is that when the best thing about your style is that, hey, you're kind of dangerous off your back and like somewhat physically imposing in the clinch. That's exactly what Jinyu Fry is going to like want to force the fight to be and get on top and do her thing. Like I don't have a lot of faith in Jinyu Fry to win like fights pretty consistently because she's kind of super low paced. She's kind of super predictable. But like it also feels like Demopoulos is just going to feel her strength and her power, and like if Gloria De Palma can more or less, I don't want to say beat you because obviously, or no, it was Silvana Gomez Juarez. Pardon me. The Argentinian girl. If she can come out and just kind of be like super physical against you, I don't really see why Jinyu Fry can't do the exact same. That being said, Fry is 37 years old. Her game is largely only successful because of physicality. So there is the serious question of, is she just going to fall off? But like, this is what was confusing because she's the one that beat Gloria De Paula. Anyways, but if you could still out clinch Yoder and De Paula and take him down, do your thing, I don't see why you can't do the same to Demopoulos. This actually feels like a less dangerous fight than either of those actually are. So there you go. Jinyu Fry for the win. Words I didn't really think I'd ever say with confidence, but hey, we're here. And that's the card. Not a ton of like supremely interesting fights, but like I said, I'm really looking forward to Bautista Kelleher. It's an interesting fight. Polya versus Morizov. It's an interesting fight. Curtis versus Vieira. That could be fun. We get to see more for Nurmagomedov. Moises versus Giagos. Interesting fight. And then there's a couple of and the main event is pretty good, but there's a couple of trash fires on here. The heavyweight fight, the Jinyu Fry versus Demopoulos fight, the Durden versus Baez fight, the Brown versus Nurembeke fight, and the Nchukwu versus Olberg fight are probably all born to like just honestly kind of frustrate me of watching fighters either not be, just not have like, not just missing tools the whole way through. And, I don't know. I like the fact that here's the key. This whole usually my podcasts go like an hour. We're gonna only get to like 50 minutes, and that's only if I like speak really long here. And I'm not going to. So yeah, check out my Discord, check out my Twitter, and check out the various sources of podcasting below. I mean, it's the same podcast on all the platforms, so whatever. But like, check it out. Spotify, Acast, Anchor, and YouTube. That's all I got for you. Have a good one, and we'll be on for the next one.